is something moving quietly beneath nearly every moment of human life. It speaks in your voice. It claims your name. It interprets the world on your behalf. And because it feels so intimate, it is almost never questioned. This is the ego. Not arrogance, not pride, not selfishness alone, but a structure. A learned system of identity that forms early, operates automatically, and shapes how reality itself is perceived. Most people believe the ego is something they have. Before going further, it is important to clarify what the ego is not. The ego is not confidence. Confidence arises from familiarity and competence. The ego relies on comparison. The ego is not individuality. Individuality is expression. Natural variation in temperament, creativity, humor, and style. The ego is attachment to identity. The ego is not self-respect. Self-respect is grounded. The ego demands validation. But awareness reveals the difference. When action flows without fear, when expression does not need approval, when correction is possible without collapse, ego is not present. The ego always requires defense. What does not require defense is not ego. You can see this in ordinary moments. Someone interrupts you, and the body tightens before thought. Someone disagrees, and the mind rushes to explain, correct, justify. Someone else is recognized, and something in you begins to compare. You share an idea and look for a reaction. Not for information, but for confirmation. You are misunderstood, and the urge to clarify becomes urgent, as if being seen correctly were a form of safety. Even silence can trigger it. The subtle discomfort of being overlooked, the need to know where you stand, the quiet question beneath the moment, am I valued or not? The ego is not always loud. Often it is simply the reflex to protect an image. And the moment that reflex is noticed, the structure is already becoming visible. The ego is not evil. It is not a flaw. It is a survival adaptation. But when it remains unseen, it becomes the invisible ruler of the mind. And when it is mistaken for the self, it quietly fragments both the inner world and the collective one. To understand why modern life feels so tense, so divided, so reactive, you do not need to look far. You need to look inward, at the system that has been shaping perception all along. The ego forms as memory organizes itself around survival. A child learns quickly what brings approval and what brings withdrawal. Slowly, an internal reference point emerges. This is who I am. This is how I must be. This is how I belong. This identity is not chosen. It is assembled. The ego persists because it once worked. It developed as a strategy for safety. Belonging meant survival. Approval meant protection. Rejection meant risk. To loosen identification can feel dangerous. Not because danger is present, but because the body remembers vulnerability. The ego promises protection. It monitors tone, status, reaction. It anticipates threat before it arrives. And because it is tied to survival memory, its grip is strong. This is why simply letting go does not work. The ego hears release as exposure. Awareness does not force the ego to disappear. It creates safety first. When the nervous system settles, the ego relaxes naturally. This is why compassion matters, not as moral softness, but as accuracy. The ego is not an enemy. It is an outdated guard still standing watch. The ego is not a thing that can be located. It is a process. A constant movement of self-reference running beneath experience. Every moment is filtered through the same quiet questions. What does this mean about me? Am I enough or not? Because this commentary never stops. It feels personal. Real. Authoritative. The ego does not announce itself as a construct. It speaks as I. It claims ownership of thought, emotion, and action. And because it speaks first, it is assumed to be true. The stability is an illusion. It is not stable. It is repetitive. Awareness interrupts the loop not by opposing it, but by stepping outside of it. The moment experience is observed without reference to me. The loop loosens. Not because anything was removed, but because something was no longer fed. And it interprets the loss of control as a threat, because it has confused control with survival for so long. Most people believe they are thinking freely. In reality, much of what feels like choice is the defense of an identity happening automatically. This is not a moral failure. It is conditioning. And conditioning persists until it is seen. The ego does not dominate by force. It governs by familiarity. It becomes the default operating system. Modern society is structured almost entirely to reinforce this egoic perspective. From the moment you are introduced to the world, you are taught to relate to life through identity. You are measured, compared, ranked. You are shown what success looks like and what failure looks like. Modern media systems are not neutral. They are optimized for engagement. And engagement is most easily captured through ego activation. Outrage holds attention. Fear increases sharing. Algorithms learn this quickly. The result is a feedback loop. The ego is stimulated, attention is captured, reaction is rewarded. When attention is monetized, the ego becomes the entry point. A mind not fused with identity is less reactive, less predictable, less profitable. Which is why awareness is rarely encouraged. You are not enough yet, but you could be. Buy this, achieve that, look like them, win against them. Protect what's yours, fear what threatens you. The ego thrives in comparison because it cannot exist without contrast. Me versus not me, us versus them, better and worse, right and wrong. When identity is central, disagreement feels like attack. When image is central, criticism feels like threat. The ego does not react to reality. It reacts to what reality means about itself. And this is how inner conflict becomes external conflict. When the ego cannot dominate outwardly, it often turns inward. The same mechanism that defends identity externally becomes self-judgment internally. This is shame. Shame is ego aggression redirected. The inner critic is not wisdom. It is the ego attempting control through punishment. I should be better. I'm not enough. But these do not lead to clarity. They lead to contraction. Awareness exposes this pattern gently. When shame is observed without agreement, its authority weakens. What remains is responsibility without violence, correction without collapse. The ego does not suffer quietly. It recruits the body. Jaw tightens, shoulders brace, breath shortens, the nervous system stays alert, scanning constantly for threat, comparison, or validation. This is why so many people feel exhausted without understanding why. They are not tired from living. They are tired from maintaining an identity. The ego requires constant energy because it is never complete. Every achievement fades. Every recognition must be defended. So even fulfillment is quietly converted into pressure. Awareness interrupts this cycle not by attacking the ego, not by suppressing it, but by seeing it. When awareness enters, the body begins to soften. The nervous system receives a new signal. Nothing needs to be defended right now. And when the body settles, something important becomes possible: choice. Awareness restores agency by breaking identification. Thoughts can be noticed without being believed. Emotions can be felt without being obeyed. The ego fears observation more than opposition. Opposition strengthens it. Observation dissolves it. When the ego is watched, it can no longer operate invisibly. This feels like annihilation, not because the ego will vanish, but because it will no longer rule. The discomfort is not harm. It is unfamiliar freedom. Nothing essential is lost when the ego is seen. What dissolves is only false ownership. And when this is realized, fear subsides. What remains is relief. There is an important distinction here. The ego is not personality. Personality is expression. Ego is identification. Personality is fluid. Ego is rigid. When people fear losing their ego, they are usually afraid of losing themselves. But awareness does not erase personality. It liberates it. The problem is not having an ego. The problem is being unconscious of it. The ego can even adopt spiritual language. Enlightenment becomes an achievement. Growth becomes a badge. Transformation becomes identity. This is where the ego becomes most difficult to detect. It no longer seeks to be successful. It seeks to be evolved, to be awake, to be more aware than others. If awakening becomes something to display, compare, or defend, the ego has simply changed language. The need to be seen as conscious is still the need to be seen. Awareness does not create a higher identity. It removes the need for one. But awareness does not need to announce itself. It does not compare. It does not claim advancement. The moment awakening becomes a position, identification has returned. Seeing this does not require suspicion, only honesty. The ego cannot heal itself. Every attempt to improve the ego as ego only strengthens the structure. Awareness is different. Awareness does not aim to become something else. It sees what is. And in that seeing, identification loosens naturally. Transformation happens quietly, not as conquest, as release. When the ego is no longer ruling attention, something changes. Silence becomes comfortable. Stillness becomes nourishing. Action arises without anxiety. Life moves through you instead of being managed by you. The ego does not disappear. It becomes functional, a tool, not a tyrant. And this is the shift contemplatives have pointed toward for centuries, not escape from humanity, but freedom within it. This is not a loud revolution. It is a quiet one. It begins not by fixing the world, but by seeing yourself. Not improving the ego, not destroying it, recognizing it. And in that recognition, the grip loosens, the noise softens. The self you thought you were is revealed as a story, useful but not ultimate. What remains is presence, and presence is peace, not as an idea, as lived reality. When the ego is seen, you are no longer imprisoned by it. You are free to be human without being owned by the story of who you think you are. And that freedom is the foundation of a more conscious world.